Welcome, everyone, to the webinar, The Magic is in the Instruction. Let's give folks a few minutes to hop onto the webinar and give Dr. Archer an opportunity to speak with you for a minute.
So thank you for being with us. You know, before the session occurred, many of you submitted questions, and so I got to view your names. And I got to view where you were from. And this is a session that is on the magic of instruction, but it's important to everyone. I saw many states represented, not just Georgia, but other states. I saw other countries represented, including one that I'm going to visit next year, Australia and Canada. So we are very glad that you are with us. So we're just letting people get on, and then we are going to be ready to start. And I think that could go ahead right now. I think we got most people in.
Well, let's give it just a few more minutes. And I see the shout out to Australia. I don't even know what time it is there. Is that, how many hours away is that, 13?
Oh my goodness. I'm not.
8 a.m. Thank you.
8
Thank you, Claire. I see that.
Right.
Oh, good. Well, good morning. Good morning and good evening. And we're in the midst of winter here, and so I think they're summering in Australia. Oh wow! Look at all the greetings, Dr. Archer. Do you see them?
No, I should.
10:36 in Adelaide. If nothing else, they're up on the screen. The chat.
So yes. So
yes, look at this.
Australia with us, New Jersey, Montreal in Canada, terrific. Wisconsin, where I work often,
Utah.
Texas, Hawaii, where I'll be tomorrow virtually. Washington, which I grew up in. And
oh goodness, look at this.
Vancouver, Wenatchee, where I went to high school. Oh my goodness, in the state of Washington. In Ohio, wow. I'm working with you next Monday. And Michigan, I've worked on many big projects in Michigan and Colorado too. And Malaysia, I will tell you, my grandfather worked in Malaysia all of his working years. Wow. So what a delight. San Diego, where I taught at San Diego State, Kansas, where I did big projects. Wow. New Mexico, wow. I had second home, New Mexico for many years, just like Pennsylvania, the patent group. South Dakota, I did this summer. I just am totally blessed to have been in all these locations.
Oh, I saw someone from Indonesia.
I have not yet visited Indonesia. But then we've got a hello from New York City, where I'll be virtually on Friday all day. Excellent, excellent.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and welcome to all of those that are coming in. Welcome to our webinar series, Spotlight on Structured Literacy. My name is Kim Day, and I'm a board member of IDA Georgia. And on behalf of the board, we're pleased to be offering this series. This marks IDA Georgia's second year working in collaboration with the Reading League Georgia, and we're very pleased for that exciting partnership. I want to say a special thanks to Nicole Vella and Ashley Edwards, both from the Reading League Georgia, who will be supporting the webinar this evening by monitoring the chat box for questions. I also want to take just a moment to thank IDA Georgia board members who work to put these webinars together in the essence of saving some time. You know who you are, and I just want to thank you as the co-chair of this committee for all your hard work. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. IDA and the Reading League Georgia are committed to providing information on evidence-based practices to educators, parents, and advocates. In doing so, we hope all students will have access to structured literacy instruction. In this four-part series, our speakers will discuss how to most effectively instruct reading based on the science of instruction and what content to include to ensure that students become competent readers. Of course, as you all know, Dr. Archer is the first speaker in our series, and she'll be focusing her presentation on joining the science of reading with the science of instruction. Before we begin, thank you to those who submitted questions. Dr. Archer mentioned earlier when you registered for the webinar. As a reminder, if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat box. And as I mentioned, the chat will be monitored, and Dr. Archer will be addressing as many of your questions as she's able to during the Q&A. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce this evening's speaker, though she needs very little introduction, as her reputation and research are known and valued by so many educators across the country and across the world. Dr. Archer serves as an educational consultant to state departments and school districts on explicit instruction and literacy. She has presented in all 50 states in many countries, including Australia, and is the recipient of 10 awards honoring her contributions to education. Dr. Archer has served on the faculties of the University of Washington, the University of Oregon, and San Diego State University. She has co-authored curriculum materials, including Phonics for Reading, a 3-level intervention program, Rewards, a 5-component literacy intervention program, and a best-selling textbook titled Explicit Instruction, Effective and Efficient Teaching. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Anita Archer, educator extraordinaire. Thank you for all 56 years.
Thank you. Yes, I was asked, how many years have you taught? And this is my 56th year. I'm blessed. So it is a deep honor to start out this series. This is the first session of the series called the Structured Literacy Webinar Series. And when we look at structured learning, we recognize that there are at least 2 bodies of research that come together in it. One, the science of reading, so any area that is critical, such as decoding and phonemic awareness and vocabulary and comprehension, would be the research on any of those areas would be concluded as a part of the science of reading. But I'm going to focus today on the science of instruction, because here's what I've noticed. I could watch many videos. This week I am working in Hawaii, and then next Monday in Ohio, watching videos with administrators so that we would be better observers of good instruction. And what I noticed is that they could have the same curriculum based on the science of reading in terms of content and how it should be teaching, how it should be taught. But the difference across teachers could be very, very different, all due to the quality of instruction that was utilized. So that is what we are going to look at. And my purposes for this, even though it is just an hour, I could tell from your questions that we have people with a great deal of background knowledge on instruction. And so my goals are, number one, to affirm you, because you're going to say, I always do that. I have always done that. I'm very careful to do that. And so sometimes the best thing that can come out of a webinar is affirmation. And then sometimes we need to be reminded. We need to be reminded about practices that we've learned about, practices that we've read about, but we're not putting into practice, and we need to. And then, of course, I hope to expand on your knowledge today, because one of the attributes of great teachers is that they have a growth mindset. They are learning, reading, going to webinars, going to seminars, going to conferences, and putting things in practice. So we hope to expand on what you already know. Now, before we start, I will tell you, if you want to get the most out of this webinar, you need to do what we know makes a difference in classrooms, and that is to respond. So I know that you are probably sitting alone in your home or at school or at your workplace, and you're watching this webinar. but it would be helpful. I'm going to have you sometimes say things together. I am going to have you read, just to remind us that good instruction is always interactive. I say something, you say something. I write something, you write something. I say it to a partner, then you say it to your partner. Okay, so before we start, let's just remember what our mission is. Sometimes we get so taken up in many details in our careers that we forget that we do have a mission. This isn't a job. This is even more than a career. It is a mission. And the mission is that the children we serve, that we have the gift to serve, that they are learning, that they're learning decoding and encoding and phonemic awareness and vocabulary and background knowledge and comprehension and writing in response to what they've read. They're learning and more learning and more learning and more learning and more learning. But here is the message of this webinar, and that is that it is our teaching that directly impacts the learning, that there is a direct relationship between the quality of my teaching and learning as an outcome. Now, I just read an article. You're going to get a number of articles, and one of them that I just got this week, but this one was so surprising to me. Foster was the author. Foster found surprising what was that teachers attributed students' performance to their instruction only 15% of the time. So they're not realizing the relationship between teaching and learning. If the students are doing beautifully, it means that you taught it well. If the students have not yet mastered it, have not learned it, then we need to look at our teaching. Looking at our teaching. Teaching is our highest power as teachers. It is what can make the most difference in terms of learning. So we tell the students what we're going to teach them. We do demonstration. We do guided practice. We do checking for understanding, all with the goal of more learning. We provide feedback. We provide praise. We provide corrections, all with the goal of learning. And we provide practice so that the students have an adequate amount of practice to make a difference. So we know that all of those make a difference in terms of student learning. So let's not just have the right content, let's have the right instruction so that we can guarantee learning, because all students can learn, not one student can't, but they need the very best instruction possible for that to occur. I'll just remind you of one of my favorite quotes, and it was for administrators to remember. No system or district in the world has made significant gains for students without a relentless focus on the learning and teaching process. And that's my experience too. The districts that made a difference, that lifted everybody up, that reduced the number of students that needed intervention, all focused on what do we know about learning? What do we know about teaching? Well, so we're going to specifically talk about explicit instruction. And you know, a principal last week asked me, how do I know when I walk into a classroom if I see explicit instruction? And I said, well, you'll know it when you see it, because the teacher is explicitly teaching something, directly teaching something. It's going to be systematic. It is going to be active. The students are going to participate. The teacher is going to give feedback. You'll know it when you see it. So in 2019, a book came out on explicit and direct instruction, and it gave this definition. I'm going to read And if you're home and you can, read along with me. Explicit teaching is not just the episode within a lesson when information is presented. It involves chunking content into small components, guiding students' initial attempts at working with that content, and gradually releasing control into more open activities as students gain mastery. It is a teaching model that progresses from I do to we do to you do. Now, I had to laugh when I read this because in 1974, I wrote a chapter that utilized terms demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding, sort of Madeline Hunter language. And I said, I want to have language that's more memorable. So I coined what is now ubiquitous everywhere. I do, we do, you do, or I do it, we do it, you do it. So that is a definite part of dynamic explicit instruction. So I took the elements of instruction. I had to shorten up our list a little bit for today. But as we go through this, I want you to think what's happening in your classroom, what's happening in your school. So first element that we're going to look at is this. And again, wherever you are, reading it with me, focus on critical content to promote learning. Now, this whole movement in terms of the science of reading has gotten people to sit up and say, what is critical? What is research validated? What do we absolutely have to do? And so I just put in here a reminder. Many of you are totally familiar with the simple view of reading, where decoding times language comprehension leads to reading. But if we look at these elements, they just are reminders of what a program would consist of. Certainly, we would teach decoding. Now, we wouldn't teach the kids to guess based on the pictures. We wouldn't teach them to guess based on the context. We would teach them that the only hint for reading is to look at the letters, to say the sounds that corresponded to the letters, and to blend it together. So we are really clear about what decoding we should start teaching in kindergarten and teach in first and second grade, and the upper grades extend by having prefixes and suffixes so students could read multisyllabic words with ease. So we're just remembered what is the content that we would be teaching and based on the science reading. So we would teach students print concepts like letter names and how to form those letters. We would teach them phonological awareness, including particularly phonemic awareness, where the students blend sounds together and they segment sounds in words auditorily. And we would definitely be teaching phonics. You know, it's so interesting because it's some of the conversations I see today on reading, it's as if phonics is like new. You know, I wrote in 1984 the first version of Phonics for Reading. We had a tremendous amount of research already on phonemic awareness, on phonics, on advanced teaching of multisyllabic words. This is not new. And we also know that we need to teach words so they become sight vocabulary, and that the students would have fluency, accuracy, rate, and expression. But we also know that critical content is around language comprehension, and we have a particular emphasis on background knowledge and academic vocabulary. You know, when I was first asked to do a session, the topic was on vocabulary, but then we went to a bigger vision of explicit instruction. But I did have them put into the materials for this session a video of me teaching students in 7th grade vocabulary. So you just see, what do we know about teaching vocabulary instruction? All right. So, well, I also got an email saying, well, I hope when you're in Georgia, you give Archerisms. Well, that person had heard me speak at a conference. And since my very first university training position, I've tried to take what was complex and put it into memorable mottos that my students, when I was at University of Oregon, started calling Archerisms. And so read the Archerism with me. Teach the stuff and cut the fluff. So we know what the stuff is that we need to focus on to make the most difference. But I think this one is particularly critical. This time I'm going to read, when I stop, say the next word. Break down complex strategies into obtainable pieces to ensure learning. Our outcome is always learning. But this one is very critical, because if we teach things in very big chunks, particularly with lower performing students, they're going to have cognitive overload, which all of you have experienced cognitive overload when too much information was coming in. We have to break it down into obtainable pieces so the students will experience success. So just 2 quick little examples. So David Kilpatrick in his books has broken down phonological awareness into what we would teach early in terms of content, what we would term as basic, which would be the most critical to practice, blending sounds into words, segmenting words into sounds, and then advanced, where we would manipulate them, deleting a sound, adding a sound, substituting sounds. My good friend, Dr. Doug Harnine, did studies on what would be the sequence we could have for introducing letter-sound associations and putting them into words. And, you know, this is useful for us because we'll notice that it starts with very high frequency letter sounds versus ends with low frequency. So the students are learning what's most useful from the get-go. And then notice the letters, the vowel letters are separated. So we have the letter A, then I separated from it. But way back here is E because of the confusion of I and E. So it's that kind of breaking it down and having it sequence for optimum gains. So here's the Archerism. The reason we break it down into obtainable pieces is so students will have success. And we know that when you experience success, it breeds more success. Why? Well, because of the research on motivation. I can't tell you how many times in the past year, people have said to me, Anita, the students at my school simply are not motivated. They're just not motivated at all. And I have to say to them, look at the research on motivation from cognitive science. 2 things need to occur if kids are going to be motivated. Want to be present, want to come to class, want to put in energy. First, they have to experience success. We have to teach at such a high level that they are going to be successful. But they also have to see that it's valued by the teacher. But success does breed motivation. So I always, right in the room right next to me is my music room, and I have a cello there. And I've taken cello over time, but never had enough time to practice it because I wasn't always at home. But then during COVID, I was home more. But I will tell you, until I began to have success, like someone could recognize what I was playing, was I as motivated to do it. So I got to feel the empowerment of success on motivation. All right, well, what else do we need to keep in mind as we teach? And we teach very explicitly. And again, reading it with me and go. Provide quality explicit instruction lessons that yield learning. Quality explicit instructional lessons. So if we look at research, and I just used one, you probably are familiar with John Hattie, Australia, Australians who are visiting with us today. And John Hattie and his team collect many research papers answering questions that are critical to us as teachers. And then they keep very well designed studies, get rid of ones that are poor, and from it have what are called effect sizes. Basically, that simply means it's effective. And 0.40 from 0 to 1 is looked at as, this is you definitely want to do it. And when we look at their outcomes, which from 2019, explicit instruction had very high outcomes. Very direct instruction had very high outcomes. Mastery learning had very high outcomes, which is just one of the many summaries that have concluded that explicit instruction is very efficient and very effective. So one way to have quality explicit instruction is to utilize explicit instruction procedures. For example, demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. So that demonstration, I am going to show you how to do it. I'm going to tell you how to do it. Will that make a difference? Absolutely. Humans love learning. And it's in our DNA to learn from other humans. But the demonstrations have to have clarity. They have to be extraordinarily clear so that the students will get it. One day I was doing a demonstration lesson and I was at the I do it stage. So I was modeling the strategy, and it happened to be a strategy on using context clues. It was teaching actually a strategy called inside outside, where the students would look inside the word first. Is there a part of the word that could help you, give you a hint about the meaning? Then you look outside in the sentence. Are there any cues in the sentence that will help you? And then there were, if you didn't find it in that sentence, you would look in other sentences. And once you figured out what the meaning might work, you would check it in the sentence by substituting it for the word, the meaning. And then you'd ask yourself, does it make sense? So I showed the students how to do it. I told them every step that I was doing. I even got some responses from them so that they would stay alert. I demonstrated a number of times. And then the next day I came back and went to, we're doing it together, and guided them in doing it, and guided them in doing it, and guided them in doing it, and guided them in doing it. And then the next day they did it as I monitored them and did it with a partner. But what was interesting on the first day where I demonstrated it, the teacher came up afterwards and said, "Oh my God, they got it. Oh my God, they got it." I want to remind us that getting it is like learning. That is like the purpose. So the instruction needs to have a good deal of clarity and move from I do it to we do it to you do it. Now, there was something very interesting as I read all of your questions, and that was we have people on this webinar that is from the whole range of opportunities for instruction. And some of you are in general ed classes. Some of you, I can tell, are interventionists that do tier 2 interventions. And we have people that are tier 3 special ed. So you might ask this question: how does this model differ? I do it, we do it, you do it, across tier 1 general ed, tier 2 intervention, and tier 3, which would be intense instruction as possible in special ed. Well, what is fascinating here is that this same, if I taught inside outside, and I taught it in a number of different environments, what would really differ is the amount of we do it. Now, I want you to listen carefully, because I keep seeing teachers going to I do it, you do it, skipping we do it altogether, where we guide them in doing it. So maybe I'm a general ed teacher and I'm teaching that strategy, and I do, and I do another dynamic demonstration where I tell them and show them how to do it, I do, and then I guide them. We do it, we do it, we do it, and they're looking very good. And so we move to you do it. But maybe I'm teaching that same strategy and I am teaching it to students that are in tier 2 in intervention. And the students for maybe they're 3rd grade intervention students, and they need a strategy for figuring out the meaning of words on their own. So I say, oh, I can teach that strategy. So I model it. I do it dynamically. I do it again. I do it another time. And then I move on to we do it. But the we do it's more extensive. We do it, we do it, we do it, we do it, we do it. Notice the gradual release of responsibility so that I am lowering my voice tone. We do it, and then you do it. But very intensive instruction would be more like this. I do it, I do it, I do it. But notice, one of the problems sometimes with very intense instruction is the teacher does, I do it, 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 and the teacher's getting really good. But we need to instead move to we do it. But here's where we have the difference. If I am teaching that strategy, it might be I guide you in we do it, 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 across days, many days. We do it, we do it, we do it. Holiday, I do it, we do it, we do it, we do it before you do it. So yes, this can definitely be used across tiers of students, but the we do it's what differs. Well, what would I say are my Archerisms for instruction, explicit instruction? This one is the one that I have adopted since the very beginning of my teaching career at universities. Because as I read the research again and again and again, the power of teaching to lead to learning was so evident. So the students had this as their motto: how well I teach equals how well they learn. That direct relationship. I don't want just 15% of the time teachers to say that the learning of my students was related in some way to my teaching. I want them to say 100% of the time, my teaching makes a difference in student learning. So that when students are doing well, we celebrate. And we, of course, review over time. If they're doing poorly, I look at my teaching. Do they need more practice? Did they have lack of clarity? Did they need another demonstration? For how well I teach equals how well they learn. And then, of course, we have I do it, we do it, you do it. Okay, we have some Aussies on. So one day, because I worked for many, many years in Australia, I was teaching, teaching teachers how to teach. And I use the term, I do it, we do it, you do it. And this wonderful gentleman raised his hand and he said, well, you know, in Australia, we just say, I do, we do, you do. Why do you say, I do it, we do it, you do it? Well, I knew I needed a clever response. And so I said to him, well, you know, I teach at University of Oregon. That's in Eugene. That's the home of Nike. Just do it. And later he said, is that really how it came about? I said, no, it was pretty clever, wasn't it? Or you could just use I do, we do, you do. But this is the power of explicit instruction in a short form: demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. Well, at the bottom here, I had routines, 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 routines. I cannot tell you how evident this was as I looked at all of these videos that we analyze teaching behaviors. The absolute glory of routines. Now, all of us are aware of behavioral routines. So we have behavioral routines. What do you do when you enter class? What do you do to participate? What do you do at the end of class? Routines, behavioral routines. But there's two that we found made big differences. Number one is that anytime we have an item that we are going to ask students to respond to, or we teach, and then we have a parallel item, and then another item that's parallel to it, and another item, we should use exactly the same instructional steps so that the student knows exactly what is happening. For example, when I teach vocabulary, I introduce the pronunciation. I then give a student-friendly definition for the meaning. I illustrate it with examples. And then I ask questions to verify if the students understand the meaning. And when I go to teach the next word, I introduce the pronunciation, I introduce the meaning, I introduce an example to illustrate it, and I ask questions to check their understanding, and the next one, and the next, so that I, as the teacher, benefit from routines. And because I know the routine, so now I can do the routine, putting more of my cognitive energy on the responses of my students. So routines, 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 routines. Now, if you were going to ask me what is the first thing we should do at our schools in regard to explicit instruction, I would have to say number 4. So reading it with me and go. Actively involve all students in responding throughout the lesson, making learning visible. Actively involve all students responding throughout the lesson, making learning visible. This is the most overt, most visible behavior instruction for our students to make. And it's exactly where, if we are going to move into more explicit instruction, our efforts should start. And why? Well, clear and consistent research results. Number 1, when the students' responses go up in a class, so doth their behavior on task. When the responses go up in terms of numbers, so doth learning. That's what we're all about. So if you want to increase learning, increase the opportunities to respond. And here's the glory. There's more on-task behavior, there's more learning, but a reduction in disruptive behaviors. Because if I'm asking you to respond, you cannot respond to academic questions at the same time as you are being inappropriate or disrupting the lessons. All right, so it's a management tool also. And many of you are teaching intervention or special ed. So if we look at the research on interventions, one of the major ways to increase the intensity of the intervention is to increase the opportunities to respond. Now, because I believe this is the first thing our schools should work on in the path of becoming more explicit, then how many responses do we want? Well, here's some guidelines. In looking at studies that have been done on teachers who are very effective, very efficient in what they do, the majority of their responses are everyone responses. Everyone says it, everybody writes it, everybody does it. And a smaller number are individual responses where I call on one student. But even there, we know that we should call on non-volunteers. So if I visit your school, one of the first things we would do is we would get rid of the sea of raised hands. We would have no hand raised as one of our universal non-negotiables. Why? Well, if teachers have kids volunteer, we know exactly what happens. The students that are highest performing students raise their hands, thus the highest performing students get the most practice. If the teacher calls on hand raised, we also get the most assertive students, the most confident students, and the students that are most proficient in English, a practice that I call teaching the best and leaving the rest. So I would call on individuals, but I also would tell us, and all of you do this, I would try to make my classroom as safe for all children as possible. Like before I call on you, I'm going to teach it very well. And then I am going to give you an opportunity to respond to it within the context of a group or to a partner. And then I'm going to call on select individuals to be certain that the group is getting the information. So I'm going to set it up where you have already been taught it, you've already practiced it, maybe you already have said it to your partner, and now you're going to be called on. Now I'm always asked, well, how many responses should we be getting? Well, luckily, we have research on that question. And so when they looked at very, very effective teachers, and these were elementary studies, they found that when the responses were simple responses, such as everybody says it, everybody gestures it, or the students held up response cards, simple responses, that those effective teachers got 3 to 5 opportunities to respond per minute. Not one response in a period, not one response in an hour, not one response in 10 minutes, but many responses within a minute. One of the best things we can do for feedback is to count the responses that we see that the opportunities to respond in a classroom in like 10 minutes. And we'd be looking for 3 to 5 opportunities to respond per minute. Now, this is just a guideline, but it certainly moves away from like one response in a period. Now, of course, if they are more response, like I'm sharing with a partner, I'm writing something down, or I'm writing a math problem on my whiteboard and holding it up, But even then, the effective teachers got one opportunity to respond per minute. Whoosh. And would it matter what kind? Well, there are many, many responses that we could get from students. So they can make a verbal response, particularly everybody says a short response together, or everybody says it to their partner. They could have short written responses, maybe writing it on a whiteboard. They could have an action response, such as use of appropriate gestures. Or my favorites are holdups. Why? Because the research highly suggests that use of holdups improves learning. Everybody writes it on their whiteboard and holds it up. Everybody has a multiple choice and choices on the screen, and they show with their hand number 2 is the correct answer. Or maybe they have a response card, yes or no, true or false, that they hold up. What's the glory of holdups? Well, the glory is I can observe all of the students' responses, thus hold everybody accountable, and everybody is going to show me their answer, and thus I have a better idea of the learning of my whole group. But I'm also going to use inclusive practices for reading. Everybody reads it to themselves. Everybody reads it together. I read, stop, and they say the next word. Echo reading, I read it, they echo it. Partner reading. Now, the problem with partner reading is that some students are lower readers than others. So I always give children the me or we option. So when it's their turn, they can say me. I can read it to my partner accurately and fluently, or we. Partner, would you join me and read it together? Wow. See, that goes to that safety, setting up a situation that's safe for children. But if you want to start and make a lot of difference, start with increasing opportunities to respond in your classroom or at your school site. So what are the Archerisms? Because I have to tell you, I'm very fond of getting frequent responses from students. Well, this is one I've used forever, particularly when I work in middle schools and high schools. Learning is not a spectator sport. Why? Some students try to make it a spectator sport. Yeah. They come to class on the first day, they sit way in the back as if to announce, my body is here, but don't expect me to participate. But that's not going to work. They will not learn, and I'm responsible for all of them. So one of my favorite ones is everyone does everything. And this is actually not one that I came up with, but my very good friend, Kevin Feldman, who trains across our country people, particularly secondary teachers, in active participation. But it is what I want to see. Everybody says it. Everybody writes it. Everybody does it. And so those are excellent reminders about getting frequent responses. Are you still with me? I hope so, because this only gets better. Number 5. I'm going to read. When I stop, you say the next word. Carefully monitor students' responses, adjusting the lesson as necessary to ensure learning. Remember, all of these elements of explicit instruction have one goal: learning, learning, learning. Now, I'm teaching a lesson, and I need to be able to know if my students are responding accurately or not. And so I must look very carefully. I must listen very carefully. And if they are doing independent work, if they are writing or they're talking to their partners, I need to circulate and monitor. I need evidence. I need ongoing formative assessment to decide, should I go forward? Should I go back? Should I review it tomorrow? This is a very interactive model of instruction. So what are my adages here? Well, look carefully, listen carefully. We can't just go through the actions. We have to go through the actions and then look at their response to it. So that we give input, we ask a question, we monitor their responses, and then we give feedback. And that is seen again and again in our lessons. I provide input, I ask a question, the students respond, I look carefully, I listen carefully, so I can give feedback. And in some cases, I have to circulate and monitor. And one of my friends, Stan Payne, included in one of his books this sequence. I'm going to walk around, look around, talk around. I'm going to walk around, look around, talk around. And the talk around is feedback. One of the strongest things we can do as teachers is be so aware of students' responses that we will provide feedback. Now, it could be praise, particularly when students have had a series of correct responses. Don't you love praise? Don't you love it when your kids comes up and says, wow, I got that lesson. That was really good teaching. Or a parent comes in and says, my child has never learned so much as they do from you. And you just feel better. And our kids do too. And it could be for behavior. Everyone's looking at me, beautiful. And sometimes it is informative, how to improve your actual performance in an area. Sometimes informative feedback, how to get better, how to do better on something you've done would differ by children. So maybe I'm teaching writing and we have a long rubric for what needs to occur. Have to have a topic sentence, have to have related details, and each of those details have to strengthen the main idea in the topic sentence. And when we write, there has to be coherence, flow from sentence to sentence. We might even use transition words to help that flow. And it has to be fairly legible if it is written out so I can read it. And then you have to have spelling, punctuation, capitalization. So some things are pretty complex with many different behaviors. So now I'm out monitoring and I come for the first child and I acknowledge that they have a topic sentence, they have related details, they have transition words. And so I want them to continue doing that when we do the same type of, let's say, summary later. But they could have handwriting that's just a little more legible by putting their words on the line. One of the best ways to improve your legibility. And the next student I go to, they've got the topic sentence, they got the related details, they have careful handwriting, they've looked at their spelling and the capitalization and and so I give them positive feedback, all of those, and suggest, though, that it could even be a step a little bit better if they added transition words, not with every sentence, but really, where would it help? So that's informative feedback. And corrections. One of the things that's amazed me over my career is how teachers are so reluctant to correct. Students made an error. It is a situation where there's an obvious error and I should correct it. But they'll say, no, that'll reduce their self-esteem. I want to tell you something. What reduces your self-esteem is you didn't learn it. If you make a mistake and the teacher corrects you with an affect that is not angry, not a put down, but just informative. And then as you make the correct response, which will help your learning in the future, then it is a very good thing to do. So feedback, look at the effect size. Wow. This one really makes a difference, whether it is affirmative, informative, or corrective. So Archerisms for feedback. Okay, this is very clever. Feedback feeds forward. Whether it is, I praise you for a specific behavior, which now you're going to do in the future, or I give you informative feedback that improves your actual response, you're going to use it forward, or I correct an error and you repeat the correct response, that also feeds forward. So we need to give feedback, 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 feedback. Well, number 7, and read it with me. Provide deliberate practice, retrieval practice, and space practice to ensure retention and learning. Wow, now we could do a whole evening together on practice, or like a week together on practice. So I'm just going to touch the big ideas. And so if we look at the research on practice, one practice is deliberate practice, which is goal-oriented practice consciously devoted to improvement of a skill. Now this we could do every single day, every time we gave an assignment. So I could say to students, you have read this section in our social studies book, please write a summary. Or I could say, we've read this section and you're going to write a summary. And the summary needs to start with a main idea statement. Then all of the other sentences have to include important details from what we've read. And then you have to use everything you know about writing a paragraph. Let's just review that. Now, that is deliberate goal-oriented practice because I'm checking mine off to see, do I have the first sentence that is the main idea of what we read? Are all of the others sentences supporting it, but critical things to remember? So that is very, very deliberate, goal-oriented practice. And I have been reading a lot in cognitive science about retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is where the students have to retrieve something from memory. Now, where this becomes really important is at the beginning of a lesson where we might go back and review what we've covered in the past. Now, one way we often do it is a recap. Okay, let me just give you an example. Maybe I am a social studies teacher in 5th grade, and we're studying the federal government. And you come into my class and I say, well, let me just review what we have been studying in terms of the federal government. First, we looked at the 3 branches of the government. We learned about the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch. And then we put a lot of extra study into the legislative branch. And as you well remember, there's 2 parts of it, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, when we studied, and so the teacher just recaps it. The research shows that is not as powerful as this. Get your whiteboard out. Now, we're going to do a review of what we've already learned about the federal government. So first, we learned that there were 3 branches in the government. think of those. Ones, turn to your partner and touching your fingers, tell them what are the three branches of the federal government. The teacher looks out at the group and they're going executive, legislative, judicial. So the teacher then gives feedback. So you don't have to have them in this order, but you could have had these three equal branches, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. That is retrieval practice, not just a recap. Well, spaced practice. Have you ever watched this in your own life? You learn something, and then, like a month later, you forgot some of it, so you had to bring it back into existence so you could remember it. Well, that is exactly what we know about spaced practice. Now, I gave you an article that was written by Brock Rosenshine on explicit instruction, but I particularly want you to attend to what he suggested in terms of practice and spaced practice particularly. So in Brock Rosenshine's work, they had a Monday review. And every Monday in every subject, they would go back and do retrieval practice review of what was occurring, what they taught in the previous week. And then they would do it the next Monday and the next Monday. So a short period of time was used to review the previous week. But then on the fourth Monday, they would go back and review all of the critical information taught that month. Did this make a difference? Yes, they had a plan. And spaced practice done in that way made a huge difference. All right. So we have had critical content. We have broken it down. We have provided very, very explicit, direct instruction. We have involved the students throughout that instruction. And we as the teachers have monitored, and we have given feedback. And we've provided judicious practice, enough practice that they would recall the information. So again, whoa, look at combined studies, looking at effect sizes, deliberate practice, retrieval practice, spaced practice. Oh my gosh, it makes a difference. And number 8. Well, let's do 7 first. Now, I had a hard time coming up with a Archerism to remind us of this. And, people often say, well, perfect practice makes permanent. And that's not true. Perfected practice over time makes perfect and permanent. Okay, notice all the P's. Okay, we'll work on that one. Perfected practice. You got better and better. It was done over time with spaced practice, and now it's correct and accurate and maybe even automatic, perfect, and you're going to recall it. Perfected practice over time makes perfect and permanent. So read number 8 with me. Utilize management procedures that support students and teachers, thus facilitating learning. I had to add this because we can't just talk about good instruction without understanding that we have to simultaneously use practices that help manage the students and reduce disruptions. So I'm going to just share with you some Archerisms that sort of summarize how I viewed it over time. Okay. So I would teach students behavioral routines, how to enter the classroom, how to exit the classroom, what to do if they don't have materials, what to do if they have to go to the restroom. And these would be very predictable. But this is the adage, and I think it works very well. Predictability predicts ability. If I consistently want students to have the right materials in class, I'm going to use a routine again and again and again So, because predictability predicts ability. You're more likely to be able to do it if it reoccurs, reoccurs, and reoccurs. It's a good one from parents too, in their own household. Okay, this is my favorite though. Provide pre-corrections. Pre-corrections simply mean I anticipate what might occur and I correct it beforehand. I anticipate what might occur and I correct it beforehand. Oh, this is important. If you expect it, pre-correct it. You know, as I watch classes, almost always something that the teacher gets irritable about and has to correct could have been totally predicted. Now, let me just give you an example that we have in one video of me teaching. So I'm in the classroom and it is a second grade. And in the back of the class is the principal, the first grade teachers, the second grade teacher, and my videographer, Dima. And I say to myself, some students in second grade are going to just keep watching the teachers, watching the principals, turning around, watching and talking, waving at the videographer. I better pre-correct it. So I said to the students, now in the back of the room, we have a number of people who are here to observe the lesson so that they can learn what they might do when they're teaching. So here's what you're going to do. Everybody turn around, wave at the principal, wave at the teachers, wave at the videographer. Now turn around and look at me, for you will never turn around and look at them again. And they didn't, because I pre-corrected it. So we have at least one new teacher on this webinar, we always teach new teachers to be certain to catch students being good, so that they are praising the students, particularly specific praise, tells them exactly what they did well behaviorally. But also, this is one for all of us. Maintain a perky pace. Because what happens in a lesson is when there are voids, the students fill it. And I don't care if you're talking kindergarten, you're talking fifth graders, you're talking seventh graders, you're talking sophomores. Avoid the void, for they will fill it. Avoid the void, for they will fill it. Well, the last one, just the fact that you are here this evening, that you are dedicated to your profession, that you want the students to learn, you want to continue to utilize the best instructional practices. I know that you do this. So my turn, intentionally establish positive teacher-student relationships that support learning in the classroom. Well, you would do this. You'd greet the students at the door. You would smile at them. You would know their names. You would have equitable practice across all the students. You would monitor all of them. You would have all of them responding. And you would constantly connect by smiling at them, connect by nodding at them in the hall, connect by knowing something like, how did that soccer game go last Saturday? And you would be kind. Remember, I mentioned Doug Carnine earlier, who had a long history in research in reading and in direct instruction. And now he does work in kindness, has a whole institute that he runs in terms of kindness. And I think it's important for all of us to remember, if you came into my house and walked up the steps from my basement to the first floor, there is a sign that says, be kind, be kind, be kind. And all of us can be kind to our students, to our fellow teachers, and to our principal, to our parents. Our world simply needs more kindness. All right. So we have a summary here, and that you would teach critical content, that you'd break down complex strategies, that you would provide quality explicit instruction, that you would involve all students. Everybody does everything. And you would constantly monitor their responses, because you need that feedback, that embedded formative assessment in order to adjust your lessons. And you would provide affirmative feedback praise. You would provide informative feedback and corrections. And you'd have practice, judicious practice. When they were given an assignment, you'd make it deliberate. You would have practice over time, so they'd have recall. And you'd have them do retrieval practice to improve memory of critical content. And you would manage them, particularly if you expected, pre-correct it. And avoid the void, for they will fill it. And you'd continue to realize that relationships and teacher-student relation also makes a huge difference in terms of student gains. Now, I was supposed to end at 8:15 on that presentation, which would be 5:15 here in Portland, Oregon, and woo, perfect timing. Now, at this point, many of you submitted questions beforehand. And as you enrolled, and then you might have put more questions in the actual chat box. So I'm going to respond to questions, but I will tell you there's so many questions. I could have had you here for 2 years to answer all of those questions. But I am going to answer them. I read them over again and again and put them into groups. So let me just pull up in front of me. This is just for me, the list of questions that I'm going to respond to. I wish I could respond to all of them, but I'm going to do my best with as many as possible. So when I looked at your questions, here's something that was very interesting. Many of you appear to be in districts that are moving from teaching balanced literacy as the philosophy and what was occurring in classrooms to structured literacy. That would include both the science of reading in terms of content and procedures and the science of instruction. And we had questions like this: what are the best ways to transition from balanced literacy to structured literacy? Or do you have any advice for teachers who work in a district that is still using balanced literacy approach? Or how do you get teachers to buy in when they feel confused by the balanced literacy push of the past? All right. So I said to myself, what would I tell you if you had done balanced literacy and were moving to a structured literacy or organization? Okay, here's what's worked for the districts I'm working with across many states. Number one, we started in the primary grades, because if they had been involved in balanced literacy, where phonics was not explicitly taught or reinforced on a systematic way, then we've got to take care of that right away. And so we want a curriculum that has a sequence. We want very explicit instruction to go along with it. Now, may I use just an example? So having worked with many districts that were making this movement, one of the districts I'm working with said, what kind of instruction should we give? And I suggested that they utilize a series of instruction procedures called enhanced core reading instruction. Enhanced core reading instruction, often called ECRI, ECRI, where you would simply take the sequence in a core program, a very systematic sequence, and you would add these instructional procedures. Well, here's what happened. And that was that the change in the students' gains was so phenomenal that even teachers who resisted moving away from balanced literacy said, oh my goodness, when I explicitly teach kids how to read words, utilizing decoding skills, and also having paired it with encoding or spelling, I've never, in my 25 years, and this I hear all the time, in my 25 years, I've never had children at the end of kindergarten reading at this level. I can't believe how high the kids read when they are coming into third grade. I've never had that before, and I've taught a lot of years. So what we want is success. So that we started with the primary grades, and in particularly, we're careful, we still had vocabulary instruction, we still had read alouds, we still had comprehension questions, we still had vocabulary, but we really strengthened that one strand to ensure that the students would be able to read the words by the end of second grade. Now, I put in an article for you to read that was given to me just in time. So I have some cohorts in Michigan who sent this article to me called Flip the Script on Change. Listen big, and you're going to enjoy that article. So often we try to change people's beliefs and how they viewed it, talking them into it, versus having them do something that changes their practices that leads to changing their attitude and beliefs. And study after study after study on change found that if the teachers, or there's many other professions this has been studied with, have actions that are taught and they're required to utilize them, and the outcome is success, and they're given feedback on the success of their children in terms of teaching, that there was much more change in beliefs and attitudes if first we change the actions and then cometh the attitudes and beliefs. Read that article. Okay, then we had a whole bunch of questions on, like you presented quite a bit tonight on explicit instruction. How do we get it started? You might have already got an inkling what I would do, but they said things such, the questions were such as, have you got any practical advice of how school leaders can embed the science of instruction in every classroom in their school? Yes. Work on opportunities to respond. How might we best support colleagues or novice teachers who are new to this type of instruction? Have staff development on opportunities to respond. How can principals engage hesitant teachers in the work of science of instruction? Give staff development on opportunities to respond. So we have done staff development within schools where we introduce something. Let's say use of partners, not just turn and talk, but structured partners. And then they discuss with their colleagues in PLCs how that might look in third grade, how it might look in kindergarten. And then they have to use it and come back to PLCs and discuss it. But opportunities to respond is always my first choice of introducing more explicit instruction. Now, we also had a lot of lots of questions that were, what should I teach explicitly? So I'm going to do these quickly. Should I explicitly teach handwriting? Absolutely. Steve Graham, probably one of the best researchers in the area of writing, would say, teach handwriting. Should I explicitly teach letter names? Absolutely. The students will be focusing on the grapheme when they learn that first label. Then you can refer to it. This is the letter A. Its sound is ah, but you would have already taught the letter name. Should I teach phonics to primary students? Absolutely. If you can't read the words, there's no comprehension hope. Should I teach it to older struggling readers? Absolutely. In fact, one of the articles that you're getting is the IES practice guide, which is looking at IES is the Institute of Educational Science, who collects studies on certain issues and writes recommendations in documents called practice guides. And they did one on intervention for older struggling readers, 4th through 9th grade. And their first recommendation is teach students strategies, a strategy, not strategies, a strategy for reading multisyllabic words. Should I teach phonics to English language learners? Yes, because no matter what your background language is, your first language, now you're learning an additional language, and ours is an alphabetic language, which you have to know the letter sound associations. Should I explicitly teach spelling? Yes. And it's pretty powerful, particularly in the younger grades, if the words that we are practicing spelling, where we slow it down and segment it into the sounds and write the word, would parallel what we're learning in terms of decoding. Should I teach vocabulary explicitly? Yes, you have a video that shows this. But here's what I see is the error most often in vocabulary instruction, where the teacher starts out not telling them the meaning of the word, but asking, does anybody here know what precipitation means? This is from a real lesson I watched, and the first hand goes up. Precipitation, I think it means what's under your arms and wet. Okay, the challenge with that is some child in the class is being very attentive and they may pick up on a total wrong answer. Teach, then ask. Teach the meaning, then ask questions to strengthen their knowledge of that word. Teach, then ask. And should I explicitly teach comprehension? I was thrilled to see that your very next session is by a friend of mine, Dr. Sharon Vaughn from University of Texas and Austin, and she's doing the session on comprehension. Now, if you ask me that question, at first I would say, remember, comprehension is an outcome. You have to be able to read the words, you have to know the meaning of words, and you have to have the background knowledge needed to understand that, and you need to focus on critical content. Thus, I'm certain that she will share with you, Sharon Vaughn, one of the comprehension strategies that she has researched called getting the gist. Well, the last category, and I've just got to watch my time. Oh, pretty good. The last category that many questions were about were, should I, or what should I teach to struggling older readers? Now, I already alluded to this, but how should I address struggling readers at the secondary level? How does this play out in secondary school settings? If you could implement one intervention consistently at secondary level with staff not trained in structured literacy, what would you guide the teachers to do in middle school and high school? Well, this is my area of research. Now I tell them I'm doing a project in New York City where we are utilizing rewards with children who read at the 3rd or 4th grade level, but are 7th grade or 8th grade or 9th grade. But again, I want you to read that IES practice guide called Providing Reading Interventions for Students in grades 4 through 9. You have its link, and it's an excellent source, beautiful review of research, and exactly the recommendations I would suggest, having research rewards that reflects those. But I do want to end this with absolutely commending you. See, a number of studies have looked at children viewing us and asking, are we credible as teachers? And when you break it down, the students looking at us is number one, does the teacher love teaching? And I know, because you're here, that you absolutely love teaching and you want to be very good at it and continue to grow. Number two, does the teacher love the content they're teaching? And so no matter what we are teaching, and I know this is true for you, you show that this is important, this is critical, we've got to learn this. And the third attribute would be, do you have a commitment to students' learning? So that you are passionate about teaching, passionate about content, and passionate about student learning. And student learning occurs when we have the very best instruction possible, and then the students learn and we adjust the lesson based on their performance. Well, I'm going to turn this back to Nicole. And Nicole, I bet it's time to sort of end this webinar, but we did rather well.
Yeah, that was perfect timing. Thank you again, Dr. Archer, for tonight's presentation and discussion. We appreciate all that you shared with us, and many thanks to everyone who joined us this evening. I know that we've all learned a good bit tonight about explicit instruction and are all thinking about ways that we can improve our own practice. So listen, if you have colleagues who did miss tonight's webinar, just please let them know that within 24 hours to 48 hours that all registrants will be receiving a link to the webinar, as well as any of the materials that Dr. Archer mentioned tonight during the presentation. And also all registrants, including those who are on the wait list, will also receive a link so that they can fill out a knowledge check / survey if they are interested in a certificate of attendance. And that they can do that whether they've watched the live presentation tonight or they've watched the recording. That form will be sent out early next week, and the registrants will have approximately 1 week to submit the form. If you do fill out the form, you will receive your certificate of attendance the day after the deadline for submission. Our next webinar in the Spotlight on Structured Literacy series is going to be held on Wednesday, February 8th at 7 p.m. The speaker is Dr. Sharon Vaughn, as Dr. Archer mentioned, and she's going to be presenting on the science of reading as it pertains to comprehension. So please go ahead and visit the IDA Georgia website and kind of get a jump start on registering for that presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you. And
thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Archer.
Passion, manage with compassion. Thank you.